when I had created that channel, I decided what is the best question I want to ask myself. And I think there's no better question than this one. And I realize it's not an easy task, and probably you're wondering, what the fuck are you speaking about? There's no way that you're going to tackle or you're going to talk about such a subject, and probably you will disagree with it, but it's fine. And for that one, I decided to use one of my favorite philosophers that I often mention, Kinkegaard. He has a lot of work on existentialism, and this is something that interests you. I will deep dive on what he says, his life, and basically the key takeaways from his work. But long story short, I've decided to talk about the existence of God. And I want to go through some of the things that people would say. And one of the things that atheists usually say is that they say, well, man, there's no evidence, there's no objective truth, and I cannot believe in something that science doesn't back. I don't believe in the existence of God because there's no proof, and you cannot make such a claim without data. God is just an ignorant belief. And Kierkegaard would say that, well, objectivity is actually the enemy of true faith. If you had proof, you wouldn't need faith. You'd just have a science textbook. Faith requires a leap into the unknown, precisely because it's uncertain. And I think this is truly what I think I'm trying to underline the most here, is that most people often look at the idea of God as if, this was something that was evident and something that needed no argument or, let's say, a discussion. But the truth is that most people who believe, and they don't need someone to tell them, by the way, Jesus didn't do that, or maybe he didn't exist, or maybe this didn't happen. They don't think in this way. They just have faith. And I think one of the best examples that I actually stumbled upon on social media was this guy who talks about the gym. And he said, and I know probably it's a weird parallel, but hear me out. He says, when you go to the gym, you actually put all your faith into the hard work that you do. You don't know if this is going to pay out. Like, you don't know the potential of your genes, of your DNA, of your genetics, but you know that you're putting in the work. And I think it's the same with the praying. It's like, you don't know if it's going to pay out. You don't know if you're going to believe. And I think this is what Kierkegaard actually wants to say, is that you don't know anything, but yet you believe, you choose to believe. And this is exactly why it takes a lot of courage. And actually he says that it's one of the highest expression of courage, because you embrace this paradox without some kind of safety, without some kind of data that would say, yeah, this is the truth. And probably the second point would be that truth would be universal. If something is true, it should be true for everyone. And that, for example, there's like so many gods, so many religions, so why don't you guys align yourself on that? Which I think is it's a reasonable argument, like at the end of the day, we all have different definitions of gods, but it all ends in the same, I would say, path. And regardless of your feelings, logic and scientific method provide a shared reality. And I think what Kierkegaard would reply is that you're looking for the truth as it's an object that you can pick up, or as if it's something tangible, but it's very subjective. It's and I think Plato was saying that, like, the truth is like a roll of dice. You see the dice in front of you, you see the truth in front of you, but you don't necessarily see your neighbor's dice. You don't see the face that is on the table because it's hidden, and you don't see the face that is going upstairs because probably you're looking at it face to it. So what he says is that truths actually don't necessarily matter, you cannot find love by scientific reason. Like, if you have to explain, why do you love your mother? Or a better one, actually, why do you love your partner? I think most people will be able to say, yeah, because she does this for me, because he's good for that, because XYZ. But when you fall in love, you fall in love for sometimes unreasonable reasons, for sometimes not just the wrong reason, but sometimes just for no reason at all. And you don't explain this love. You don't have to explain it. It's there. That's why you say, I love you. And you don't say, oh, I love you because you're very intelligent, because you're very beautiful, because you're very strong or something like that. You just love. And that's the way most people go on a daily basis. And you don't explain that purpose. You don't explain commitment to something, to a purpose. It cannot be found in a lab. And the truth doesn't change how you live your life. It's just not right. And I think it's one of the best arguments that is coming from the atheists. It's one of the where I think most people would agree that if and I think the quote goes by, if a benevolent God, all-powerful God, allows, let's say, the amount of suffering that we see in the world, religion is just a coping mechanism for a cold universe, or let's say a bad God, a God that does a lot of harm, or a God that doesn't exist because he's allowing this suffering, this unnecessary suffering to happen. Actually, Kierkegaard was to reply that suffering is not a puzzle. It's not to be solved by the mind, but it's the reality to be endured by the spirit. So a lot of people call religion like coping mechanism or defense mechanism. But you could argue the opposite. You could say, well, your logic is a hiding mechanism because you use that reason to distance yourself from the intensity of existence, the reality that potentially God exists. And this is a terrifying truth. I think it's Jordan Peterson who was saying that I'm terrified by the idea that God could potentially exist. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't really understand. But imagine if there was like an all-powerful, omnipotent, omniscient being, or non-being. I mean, it depends what your definition of a God is. In my mind, it's very hard to grasp the idea of God. And I think we try to write or describe it in such a way that our common souls won't understand, but potentially this is something that we cannot comprehend or even grasp. But what Kinkegaard would say is that to stand before God in the midst of suffering, it's harder than simply dismissing him. And that's precisely why believing is beautiful for him, because he says that no matter what, you still believe. And no matter what, you still put faith. And remember the analogy I made with the gym. It's like, okay, you broke your foot, or okay, today you didn't eat properly, or today you didn't have such a good day. But at the end of the day, you're still doing in the work, man. You're still putting in the work. And no matter what, who gives a fuck? And actually, it's what David Goggins usually says. And I'm going to reference that guy a lot because he's truly like a lot of people see disruptive for a lot of wrong reasons, especially in the startup/company world. But David Goggins, man, he's well head of a character. I'll present him in another video, but basically David Goggins is an ex-Marine. He was basically very fat, very miserable, suffered racism, suffered a lot throughout his life. And man, I respect that. I don't say that in a negative way. Like, this guy has balls. And he suffered a lot, man. Like, he went through a lot. And one of the things he did is that he said, okay, I'm gonna lose a lot of weight in a very minimum of time. He went to become I think a Marine. He basically suffered probably one of the worst training in the military, at least in the US. And then he went away to become a very bright man that a lot of people look up to, because he was able to tackle his sufferings, face his trauma, face his demons, doing sports. But not just like doing sports, like regular, you and me kind of thing, where we go 3-4 times a week to the gym. we're talking about a guy who ran, I think, for days, like nonstop. We're talking about a guy who, is an unstoppable machine, like really. Who's going to carry the boats? This kind of saying, like, who's going to carry the logs? This kind of saying, like, stay with me. What he's saying is, who's going to carry the boats? Because I think it's a test during the military in the US where they have to carry boats on top of the head, over the top of the head, and they have to stand there for a while. And it's very, it's a euphemism to say it's very hard. But it's basically traumatizing experience. And he was able to turn that around and say, I'm not going to quit, I'm going to be there and I'm going to do that. And this is what we do, motherfucker. That's what he would say. So anyway, I digress, but reality is that he put his faith into what he's doing, his work. And he didn't need no goddamn advice or logic behind it. He just put the work, man. And I think this is the point with God, and I think where Kinkegaard is saying is like, you don't have to know to do something, but you have to live it. You have to embrace it. Yeah. So following a few other points, because probably your arguments or your, let's say, the reasons why you believe in God, whatever it is, whichever standpoint you come from, but I think it's interesting to go through another one. Atheists usually say, yeah, we don't need a God to be good. I don't need the Bible, the Torah to tell me, oh, I need to be good and this is what I need to do, and this is why. They say that morality evolved through social cooperation, empathy, through technology, discovering of new things, sometimes even just letting go of certain traumas and talking about things like therapy. And that now we follow ethical rules, like, for example, some sexual harassment is not a taboo anymore. Sexism isn't a taboo anymore. It might be in certain places or certain parts of the world, and I don't mean to be a bigot, but the truth is that it's less and less because we work on that. At least in the Western world, I feel like we've made a lot of efforts to tackle that. And I think, again, this is an assumption, but I think most atheists would say that, yeah, and I cannot speak for all of them, but they would say, yeah, we're ready to function. We allow ourselves to function because we're trying to reduce harm. It doesn't mean that it's perfect. It doesn't mean that everything is okay and that nothing exists in terms of problems, that we're trying, and we've tried, and not necessarily because of God. If we look at society nowadays, especially in the West, a lot of people don't necessarily believe in God, and a lot of people are atheists or consider themselves atheists. And Kierkegaard would say, yeah, but this is like merely the ethical stage, because living by the rules of the let's say the universal rules, what happens if it fails? Because the morality is a private, and it's a responsibility before God. And that's what he argues, is that when Abraham had to go beyond social ethics to find a higher individual relationship with God, he had to do it himself, and he did it because of God. And actually, this one for me is perhaps and again is biased, but I think the best thing I would say is that the principles we live by, like do not kill, do not rape, do not do harm to others, they come from the Bible. They come from Christianity. Most of the things we know and most of the principles we live by, they don't have, I would say, logical reasoning. Like, there's no reason to say, oh, you shouldn't kill. And you might say, yes, there is. It's bad. But why? Have you ever asked yourself why it's bad? Because most people actually think it's bad because they just internalized it. And they would say, yeah, it's bad because, nobody deserves to die and everything. It's like, why? Because in the end, I can think about 1,000 reasons to kill someone. In the end of the day, it's like there are a lot of people who perhaps deserve to die. If you look at Hitler, does he deserve to live? And what I mean is that it's an argument that could be reasoned with and that could be used in this scenario. Not saying that anybody deserves to die, but Point being that it's easy to draw the line, but who draws the line? What makes, let's say, killing an animal acceptable but not a human? Yeah, because we're able to feed off them, but what makes it okay to feed off animals if we can become a vegan? So you see, it's like this kind of, we're able to, I would say, to challenge a lot of ideas when we think that there's no God or that there's no religion needed. But at the end of the day, most of the things we think are internalized. And I think this is what a lot of people in the modern world have internalized, is we've never been more Christian. However, we've never been, let's say, not going to the church as much. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically what I mean is that we behave like Christians, a lot of us. We're saying, yeah, being violent is bad. I mean, nobody wants to be violent. Nobody wants to do harm. Nobody wants to eat meat because we're afraid that it kills animals and it harms, let's say, to have even milk or honey, which is an understandable opinion, And at the same time, we refuse the idea of going to church or believing in God because we think, yeah, but it's ignorant and there's no factual data for that. There's no, let's say, backed proof. But also there's no proof that God does not exist. And I think that's what Kinkegaard would say, is that, first of all, you're thinking like a Christian. So it's funny that you would come up with such argument, but also you're not the one who, I would say, decides. You don't get to decide. You don't get to draw the line, because the line that has been drawn, it has been drawn for you. And you come with assumptions about something. And I digress again. But the fifth point, and this one is interesting as well, is I think most atheists, and I would be interested to hear what you think about that. But they say that religion is a tool for mass control and basically turns people into sheep who follow ancient dogmas, and they're not able to think for themselves. They're not able to comprehend the world. They're just following, and they're just following blindly, and they're ignorant, and they're bigoted. And I don't think that Kierkegaard would disagree with that. Like, I don't think he would say, yeah, church, pope, religion is perfect. But the crowd, let's say that he's wrong, or let's say the harm that religion does, it's not exclusive to religion. Because if we take the example of, let's say, a pope is wrong because XYZ, it's the same as saying, let's say, one president of the United States, like Obama, did something and he's wrong, and therefore the whole Americans are to be blamed, or the whole US is to be blamed. It's like, well, maybe not. Like, you don't necessarily think that all Germans were guilty because of Hitler. You don't necessarily think that all Soviets were bad because of Stalin, etc., etc. One good or one bad doesn't eliminate the good, and vice versa, the bad. And if you take one example, yeah, I mean, of course, the crowds can be terrible. I mean, if you look at the history of the world, it's like some crowds can be terrible and they can do a lot of harm. But at the same time, those crowds, they exist in anything, in political parties, in religion, in even like meat eaters, vegans. I talked about it, and you can see around you some people that are obnoxious or some people that do a lot of harm, and they don't need a reason for that. It's just who they are. And faith is not about following a group or following even, like, I would say, a pope or a religion or something like that. It's about the individual standing alone in the face of God. And we often think, okay, we are free because we don't believe in God. But the idea here is that, yeah, we're following a crowd. I mean, we often say, oh, I'm leaving the choice to my child to become a Christian if he wants, or become a Muslim or a Jew or whatever. But you're not leaving the choice by not taking a decision. Because I think it's the same as saying, oh, I want them to choose if they want to become a vegan or if they want to eat meat. It's like, what is their diet now? And if their diet is, let's say, vegetarian, then you're making a decision. You influence that. Maybe for the best, actually. Maybe it's for the good of your child, but you're influencing that. So I think that saying we're leaving the choice is not only hypocritical, it's very fake. And yeah, basically, I would like to hear what your thoughts are on the subject, but that's all for me. Peace.